Welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast, a podcast about the popes of Rome and Christian Church. Prepare yourself to step behind the ropes and leave the official tour of the story of the popes and Christianity. I am your host, Steve Guerra, and I thank you for joining me on this journey. Hey, welcome back to the History of the Papacy podcast. I am your host, Steve, and today we are continuing our series on the First Temple of Jerusalem. Previously, we explored the construction of the First Temple of Jerusalem, built under the reign of King Solomon. That major monumental construction project became the center of worship and religious life for the kingdom of Israel. Whether Solomon actually existed or if he did build the temple is a different topic for a different episode. The last episode, as it were. Go back and listen for more. In this episode, we'll shift our focus to what happened after Solomon. The first temple stood for centuries, but time, neglect, and political upheaval took their toll. Several kings undertook renovations to restore and maintain the temple. We'll shift our focus to what happened after Solomon. The first temple stood for centuries, but time, neglect, and political upheaval took their toll. Several kings undertook renovations to restore and maintain the temple, each leaving their mark on this sacred site. We examine how these renovations reflected the religious and political struggles of their time. Let's dive into the history of the First Temple's restoration. Solomon's temple stood for nearly 500 years, a remarkable feat for an ancient structure in such a tumultuous region. Throughout its history, the temple endured periods of glory, neglect, and even desecration. While its longevity is impressive, it didn't remain unchanged. According to the Old Testament, 3 kings, Joash, Hezekiah, and Josiah, undertook renovations to restore and maintain the temple. However, the reigns of Ahaz and his son Manasseh complicate this picture. The renovations of Ahaz and Manasseh are usually seen as not such great renos. They are more like when that owner of a stately old house paints over the beautifully stained woodwork, laid linoleum flooring over the hardwoods, tore out the pocket doors, and sided the house with the cheapest, ugliest asbestos siding known to man. Some of these kings' efforts were celebrated, while others were condemned. Their renovations reflected more than just the condition of the temple. They reveal the religious and political struggles of their time. In the next few sections, we'll explain each of these rulers and the impact that they had on the house of the Lord our God. Let's look at Renovation 1.0. The first recorded need for the temple being renovated came in the wake of destruction, though exactly who was responsible and how much damage was done remains a matter of debate. According to the Bible, Pharaoh Shishak of Egypt plundered Jerusalem and despoiled the temple. This pharaoh is often identified with Shoshank I, the Libyan ruler who founded Egypt's 22nd dynasty. Egyptian records, particularly the Bubastite portal at Karnak, confirm that Shoshank led a military campaign in the southern Levant. However, whether he actually sacked Jerusalem itself remains controversial. Some scholars argue that Shoshank's campaign focused on other cities and that biblical accounts of his attack on the temple may be exaggerated or even completely historically uncertain. Not to make things even more complex, another possible source of damage comes from within Judah itself. The biblical accounts suggest that Queen Athaliah, the grandma of King Joash, looted the temple during her rule. While the text primarily describes her actions as religious desecration, it also raises the question of whether she also caused some structural damage. By the time of King Joash or Jehoash, the temple was in clear need of repair. 2 Kings 12 describes his efforts to restore it, though the focus is less on the actual repairs and more on the financial funding and disbursement difficulties than the actual repairs required and then made. The biblical account details how funds were collected but initially mismanaged, which leads to further delays. Further complicating this history is the so-called Joash inscription, a stone tablet found near the Temple Mount all the way back in 2001. The inscription describes repairs to the temple in language similar to the biblical narrative, which seemingly confirms the accounts in Kings and Chronicles. However, the Israeli Antiquities Authority declared it a modern-day forgery, and its authenticity remains highly disputed. This period is a tangled mix of archaeology, textual evidence, and historical interpretation. Whether the temple was truly damaged by Shoshank, Athaliah, or both, or whether it needed repairs at all, is still debated. What is clear is that Joash saw the need to restore the temple, marking the first recorded attempt to repair Solomon's temple. Judah was a kingdom in crisis in the late 700s to 600s BCE. So this period from the mid-700s to the mid-600s BCE was a real roller coaster for Judah, Israel, and the Near East. The three kings, Ahaz, Hezekiah, and Manasseh, ruled Judah from roughly 735 to 642 BCE, though the exact dates vary depending on how biblical scholars interpret the historical and biblical accounts. What is clear is that Judah, like the rest of the region, was caught in a storm of political and religious upheaval. This was the era of the rising Assyrian Empire, a military powerhouse that reshaped the whole political landscape. The northern kingdom of Israel and its capital, Samaria, fell to the Assyrians, and Judah found itself increasingly vulnerable. Territory was lost, and the once strong kingdom was reduced to little more than a vassal state. While Judah technically remained independent for a few more decades, the writing was already very much on the wall, to quote a prophetic voice a few books later in the Bible. Judah's days as a sovereign kingdom were numbered. Beyond the political struggles, this was also a period of deep religious tension. A fierce battle played out between those who pushed for more pure Yahwistic monotheism and those who sought to blend Israelite traditions with Assyrian religious practices. King Ahaz and his grandson Manasseh took the path of accommodation, adopting elements of Assyrian religious traditions to maintain favor with their powerful political overlords. Their changes were less about physical renovations of the temple and more about modifying religious practices, aligning the kingdom's worship with Assyrian expectations, and perhaps securing Judah's survival in the process. Stuck right in the middle of this struggle was King Josiah, who would later emerge as a major reformer and temple restorer. Unlike Ahaz and Manasseh, Josiah pushed back against foreign religious influences, making sweeping changes to religious practices and launching significant temple renovations. His reign marked a desperate attempt to restore Judah's religious and national identity in the face of mounting external pressures. This internal conflict within Israelite religion played out in the biblical texts, where fiery prophets called for a return to that strict old monotheism, while other leaders promoted religious syncretism. The Bible serves as our primary source for understanding these debates, but as always, questions remain. Are these passages a reflection of contemporary struggles, or do they represent later interpretations of the past? What is certain is that this period laid the foundation for the most significant temple restoration yet, one that Josiah would lead an attempt to reclaim Judah's religious heritage and strengthen its national identity. But in the midst of all this chaos, one king would rise, not to compromise, but to cleanse, restore, and rebuild. Josiah would not only renovate the temple, but attempt to reshape the very soul of Judah itself. Hey, Steve here. If you're enjoying the History of the Papacy podcast, consider joining us on Patreon at patreon.com/History of the Papacy. We're working toward going completely listener funded, which means no more ads ever. When you join, you get early access to episodes, monthly book giveaways, and most importantly, your name is added to the History of the Papacy Diptychs, our own list of commemorated supporters. You can become an Antioch level supporter for just $3 per month. But it makes a huge difference to making the History of the Papacy ad-free and independent. Nobody likes ads, not you, not me, and I'm the guy who records them. So let's just get rid of them. Visit patreon.com/History of the Papacy and join today. Caught in between the reigns of his father, Ahaz, and his son Manasseh, two kings with really different versions of Judah. But let's put Josiah aside for just a moment, and let's talk about that one stuck in the middle, Hezekiah. So he was caught in between the reigns of his father Ahaz and his son Manasseh. So two kings with really different versions of Judah. Hezekiah ruled during a time of incredible pressure. The Assyrian Empire loomed large, threatening not just Judah's borders, but its identity. While Ahaz had leaned in the compromise and Manasseh would later swing even harder towards compromise and assimilation, Hezekiah tried to chart this middle path, resisting foreign domination while reinforcing Judah's spiritual foundations. Hezekiah's reign was marked by crisis and resilience. His resistance to Assyria was only partially successful. While he managed to hold on to Jerusalem, the vital stronghold of Lachish fell. Assyrian king Sennacherib couldn't take the capital, but he left Judah fractured and humiliated. In the famous Taylor Prism, Sennacherib described Hezekiah like a bird in a cage, trapped and helpless, and yet Jerusalem stood. Hezekiah is one of the most well-documented kings of Judah, both in biblical and extra-biblical sources. I often use Hezekiah and Sennacherib as a teaching point for my students. Both claimed victory, Hezekiah in the Hebrew scriptures and Sennacherib in his royal inscriptions. So who really won? In many ways, both did. Sennacherib failed to capture Jerusalem, but succeeded in turning Judah into a client state. Hezekiah didn't achieve full independence, but he did preserve the kingdom. History isn't a scoreboard. Both sides were fighting for different objectives, and both met their goals partially. As I said, I often use Hezekiah and Sennacherib as a teaching point with my students. Both claim these massive victories in their respective accounts. Hezekiah in the Old Testament, Sennacherib in his cuneiform inscriptions. Could they both be right? Who won? Who lost? In essence, they both did. History in life isn't a sports game. Different people can fight for different goals. Sennacherib set out to crush Judah and secure the trade routes running through his territory. While he didn't conquer Jerusalem, he did succeed in turning Judah into a vassal kingdom. Hezekiah, meanwhile, wanted to keep Judah free from total conquest. Jerusalem wasn't taken, and the kingdom did survive, albeit very diminished. So both sides achieved parts of their aim while falling short of others. Who do you think was the big winner? Put your thoughts in the comments section, especially like and subscribe to this channel on YouTube. And when it comes to the temple, Hezekiah's renovations were less about architectural embellishments and more about these religious transformations. His first move was to tear down the high places, rural altars and mini temples where people had long worshipped, and this was no small act. Hezekiah wasn't just streamlining worship, he was centralizing it. All sacrifices, all devotions, all religious authority were to flow through Solomon's temple in Jerusalem. Hezekiah's second renovation was more practical, but also more painful. In a desperate effort to appease Sennacherib, he stripped the gold from the doors of the temple. It was really a humiliation, a physical and symbolic cost of vassalhood. Still, this moment is framed in the biblical text, not just as a payment, but part of a broader effort to purify and sort of reset the temple. The books of 2 Kings describes a cleansing of the temple, removing foreign idols, restoring proper worship, and bolstering the Levitical priesthood. Perhaps more symbolically, Hezekiah reinstituted the Passover and invited the remnants of the northern tribes already conquered by Assyria to come to Jerusalem, participate. It was controversial, bold, and deeply political. It was a sort of unite the clans move, trying to bind a fractured people through shared worship and shared memory. In the end, Hezekiah's renovations weren't just about bricks, beams, or gold. They were an attempt to reinforce Judah's spiritual core, to repair not only the temple, but the very idea of a chosen people, set apart and rooted in a covenant that still had meaning, even though it was under threat. Still, Hezekiah's reforms were just the beginning. Josiah would pick up the mantle with even greater urgency, leading to a sweeping campaign to not only repair the temple, but to define the faith and the future of Judah itself. Now, if Hezekiah was a reformer trying to hold the line, Josiah was a revolutionary set on drawing a new one. His reign marked the most ambitious and dramatic religious reform in the history of the First Temple, and it all began with the major building project. The book of 2 Chronicles, chapter 34, verses 8 through 12 tells us, Steve here with a quick word from our sponsors. You can't ask for a better reno project than that. It went smooth as silk. In the end, Josiah wasn't just patching up a structure. He was symbolically rebuilding Judah's covenantal identity. His reforms were sweeping and aggressive. He purified the temple, tore down high places, removed idols, and reinstituted the centrality of Jerusalem as the sole location of proper worship. This was more than political maneuvering. It was a whole religious reset. The funding came not just from Judah, but from the remnants of the northern tribes, Manasseh, Ephraim, and beyond. The work wasn't just centralized. It was collective. The people were invited into the reinvestment, literally and spiritually, and to do that into this temple and their shared identity. For Josiah, the temple renovation was the physical manifestation of a theological mission to restore faith, unity, and obedience in the face of a fractured and really fading out kingdom. Josiah's renovation wasn't just stone and wood. It was a call to return. Whenever I've lived in an old house, I always held out hope that I'd find some hidden artifact stashed behind a wall, a newspaper from a century ago, maybe even a little forgotten heirloom tucked into a stud or something like that, or a gap in the wall. I found a few old curiosities here and there, but nothing special, definitely nothing historic. Josiah, though, he hit the mother lode. In the midst of his temple renovation, something remarkable happened. While the workers were working around doing a little this and that, just the usual routine stuff, the high priest Hilkiah stumbled upon something that would change everything, as recorded in 2 Chronicles, chapter 34, verses 14 to 15. This wasn't just some old book. It was the book. The Mosaic Law, a long-lost foundational text forgotten or hidden in the temple itself, and rediscovered the very moment Josiah was trying to revive the nation's spiritual heart. In one stroke, Josiah's renovation project went from a national religious reform to something way bigger. It became a covenantal reawakening rooted not just in tradition, but in this rediscovery of the sacred law. Man, what I would have given to find something awesome like that behind some old drywall in my house. The biblical text, at the very least, shows that what Hilkiah found that day wasn't just any old religious scroll. It may have been the book of Deuteronomy itself. If that's true, the timing couldn't have been more perfect for Josiah. He wasn't just looking to spruce up the temple a little bit. He was leading a full-blown religious movement, reform movement, that is. And now, right on cue, comes the original law code of Moses. That's a game changer and a convenient one at that. But Josiah and his officials didn't just take the scroll at face value. They needed to confirm its authenticity, its authority. So who do you turn to? A wise old prophet? Surely. Someone deeply respected in religious circles? Of course. And yes, they did. But maybe not the person you'd expect. They went to Huldah, a prophetess. Huldah's name only appears in two places in the Bible, in the books of Kings and Chronicles, and only in connection to this event. We don't get much backstory, no elaborate introduction. She isn't a household name like, say, Isaiah or Jeremiah, but in this very moment in the text, she was the only one they trusted to interpret the text and speak on behalf of the Lord. And Huldah confirmed it. The book was genuine and its message was urgent. Judgment was coming, but Josiah's heart and repentance had delayed it. The reforms must continue and the covenant must be renewed. It's quite interesting that it wasn't a wise man that the guys went to immediately verify their find. It was a woman and a prophetess. In the middle of construction dust and political tension, a forgotten scroll and a little-known prophetess helped shape one of the most profound spiritual pivots in Judah's history. With the rediscovery of this law book in hand, Josiah wasted no time at all. He launched what would become one of the most sweeping religious reforms in the history of Judah. The newly found text didn't just confirm his mission, it gave it direction and urgency. One of Josiah's first major acts was to reinstitute the proper observance of Passover. According to the biblical account, it hadn't been celebrated like this since the day of the Judges. This wasn't just about the ritual. It was a recentering of Judah's identity around its covenant history. The temple, Solomon's temple, would once again become the singular and sacred place of worship and sacrifice. All other sites, high places, local shrines, regional altars were all shut down. Josiah made it clear worship would be centralized in Jerusalem, but he didn't stop there. 2 Chronicles chapter 34:24 tells us that Josiah got rid of mediums, spiritists, the household gods, and the abominations that were seen in the land of Judah and Jerusalem. It was a full-scale purge of anything that didn't align with the newly reaffirmed law of Moses. Now, we have to acknowledge something important here. Our only source for these events are the books of Kings and Chronicles. There's no independent records outside of the biblical narrative to confirm these sweeping changes. So, whether every detail is historically accurate or not, what matters is how the writers of these texts wanted the story remembered. They wanted to see a turning point, a king who tore down the altars, cleared out the idols, and called the people back to that old religion, that old covenant. Whether it happened exactly this way or not, Josiah's legacy in the biblical tradition is clear. He was a king who tried to rebuild not only the temple, but the religion of the people. Josiah's reforms may have marked a high point in Judah's spiritual life, but they couldn't stop the political collapse already gathering speed. The last king of Judah died in the battlefield at Megiddo, fighting against the Egyptians. With his death, The stability he had tried so hard to restore unraveled rather quickly. In the years that followed, 3 of Josiah's sons and a grandson would take turns at the throne, but none could hold the kingdom together. Around 586 BCE, the end did come. The Babylonians under King Nebuchadnezzar swept in, conquered Jerusalem, and brought the kingdom of Judah, and with it the first temple period, to a violent close. It could have been the end of the story. That's what happened to countless other peoples conquered by the great empires of the Near East. They vanished from history, absorbed and erased, but not the Judeans. For them, this wasn't the end. It was the end of an era, yes, but it also marked the beginning of something new. Nebuchadnezzar may have reduced Solomon's temple to rubble, but the identity, faith, and the story of the Jewish people would continue to grow, shaped and challenged and transformed in exile. And that's the story we'll explore next. So with that, I will leave you on a cliffhanger, but I will see you on our next stop on our trip through the history of the popes of Rome and Christian Church.
The Historical Jesus Podcast is the sweeping saga of the life and times of Galilean Jesus of Nazareth, as well as the faith, religion, and church founded to honor and disseminate his acts and teachings. Join me, Mark Vinette, on this fascinating journey through time, exploring the many great works of Christian theology, literature, architecture, music, and art inspired by the words and deeds of Jesus Christ.